Hey, it's Tony here, and today I'm going to show you a video that lays out how to use Nina with Siril and Photoshop and Seestar. So Nina would be for capturing Seestar images, Siril for processing those images along with Photoshop. And we're going to work on an object that is referred to as IC1396A, which is the elephant's trunk nebula, which is part of a bigger nebula, which is called IC1396, without the A. So with no further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start my Seestar app, and it's then going to connect to my Seestar S50. And the reason I'm connecting is this then helps Seestar understand its location and its pointing direction, and it gives that information over to Nina, which is a very important step. And so all I would do is I'd go into stargazing. You can skip this part here. And then I would use the joystick, and I'd basically move the Seestar to point towards the south, roughly, let's say, south, slightly to the east, and then about a 40 to 50 degree elevation. And once I've done that, I can then move over to Nina. So I've got that step accomplished. Let's go ahead back to the main menu, and then we'll take a look at the Nina piece. Okay, so my Seestar is powered on, and now I need to make sure that Nina can see the Seestar. And so I'm in the Nina interface right now, and there's a power button here. I just click on this, connect all devices, and then Nina will go ahead and connect to the Seestar. And you'll see that by this equipment icon here, and then I've got camera, it's connected. Then I've got the filter wheel is connected. I've got the light pollution filter is selected, but I can also choose the other ones in Seestar. The focuser, so you can see I've got all the focuser controls here. The mount settings, can set the tracking rate. So in this case, we want this sidereal tracking rate. And then the next thing we want to do is go over to the switch. We can turn on the dew heater. And so we'll be ready to go. And then in Nina, I'm going to go over to the imaging tab. And there's a couple of things that I want to do in Nina. Because I'm using Nina to capture Seestar images, the Nina will capture the lights images, which is the image of the object, but also we need to connect. We also need to capture darks images. So these represent the inherent noise in the Seestar, as well as bias images. And to do that, it's pretty easy. I will just go to image here, and I'll just go over to this imaging button. And so for the bias, we set the exposure to 0. And we can just give it a name, for example, call it bias. And then we would go ahead, loop, save on, and just go ahead and capture. And then for the darks images, we would go here and set the same exposure time as the lights images, and then we just call this dark images, and do the same thing. We'll probably capture maybe 10 or 20 of the bias and then the dark images, and this will help us when we do the processing in Siril. So that would be it. We'd be good to go. And the only thing that we'd do next is we'd go over to the framing wizard and find the object that we want to capture. So we go into the coordinates, put in the name IC1396. And you can see that shows up here. I can load that image. And so that the image of the IC1396, which is the whole nebula here, is shown in the display. And this rectangle here represents the chip size in the Seestar camera. And so what I can do is, where it says targets here, I can increase the number of panels, horizontal and vertical. So say, for example, I wanted to capture 4 by 2 panels. This would actually automatically then capture a mosaic. So if I select this, and then what I would do is in Nina, I would go ahead and add this target to sequence. And then if I go to the sequencer, you can see those panels are now represented here. So if I look at the first panel, and if I click on target options, select this to on and on. All this means is when I start this sequence, then the Seestar will slew to the target and center for this particular panel. And I can say, I want to collect, say, let's say 120 panels, each one around 20 seconds. And it's going to be a light frame. And then what I would do is move over to the next panel and do exactly the same thing as before. Slew target, number of panels I want to collect, and then the exposure time. And that would be it. So that's basically my process in Nina. I encourage you just to play around. So what you would do is, to recap, power on your Seestar, use the phone app to point your Seestar roughly to the south, but a little bit to the east, point it up. And that sort of gives the Seestar knowledge about where it's located and where it's pointed. Then you go into Nina and connect the equipment, which is the Seestar, representing the mount, the filter wheel, the dew heater, and the camera. Collect your darks images with the lens cap on. You want it totally dark, black. Collect your bias frames at 0 exposure. And then you go into the sequencer and, go into your framing and select the object, and then decide if you want to do a mosaic or not, and then go into the sequencer. And so that would be it for the Nina part. Next, we'll go over to Siril and process the captured image. So now I've opened up Siril, and I've already opened up the image that I captured. So the image was the IC 1396, the whole nebula, of which the Elephant Trunk Nebula is part of that. So I captured the whole thing as a mosaic. And to process it, I had a script. So I go to scripts here, Siril scripts. I've got a script that I built. And basically what it does is, if I scroll down to the one that I used, it was basically, let's see here, this one here. So it was go ahead, process the lights, process the bias frames and the darks frames, do a background extraction on each one of the frame. Make sure that when you overlap the tiles that make up the mosaic, do a normalization of the tiles. Now, it's a really intensive script. And I'm going to warn you, because of this overlap part, this normalization, the script can take about an hour to run. So it's a long, long time. Now, I've also run a similar script without this overlap piece, and that just takes just a few minutes. I ran it using overlap because I felt like it gave me a slightly better result in terms of hiding the overlap of the tiles. And so you can definitely give that a try. So anyway, my file's already opened. I'm in linear view, so that's why you don't actually see anything. Maybe this very slightly faint star here. If I go into Autostretch view mode, now you can see the whole mosaic. You can see a bit of glow here on the edges, but I would argue it's kind of hard to see the borders of the tile. So here's one tile here where you don't really see the border. So it's done a pretty good job. However, what I need to do is kind of clean up these edges. So holding down my left mouse button in Windows, I'm going to drag here. I'm going to crop the image. So right click, crop. And so that kind of brings out the details a bit more clearly without those edge artifacts. And then the next thing I want to do is, even though in my script I did a background extraction, I'm going to run background extraction again. And I'm going to go to processing. I'm going to use GraXpert AI. So I'm going to run this script and it will bring up a dialog box. And I'm just going to leave everything at default. Background extraction, smoothing halfway, click on apply. And it just takes a few seconds. You see it's already completed. And so it made a very slight improvement to my eyes in the image. And then the next thing I want to do is do a plate solve. So this kind of tells Siril the capture parameters and kind of the object parameters that's being processed. So we go to astrometry, image plate solver, and it brings up the dialog here. It's populated the focal length of the Seestar pixel size. Already done that for us, and I can just click on OK, and you can see here it's already immediately inputted this information regarding the image. And then the next thing we want to do is do a color calibration. So I go to image processing, color calibration, spectrophotometric color calibration, click on it. And here I can select that I was using a one-shot color camera, which is what's in the Seestar. I can select the sensor. So it was a Seestar S50. I did use the light pollution filter. So I select that and then just click on OK. Just takes a few seconds and you see the color very, very subtly changed there in the image. All right, so we're getting closer. If I use my mouse wheel, I can kind of zoom in here and you can see the elephant trunk's nebula, part of the bigger nebula, came out pretty well. It's about a total, I think maybe like 4 or 5 hours of capture. And the next step you could do optionally, if you want to, is to remove the stars so you can then just focus on the nebula part and emphasize this. Honestly, for my eyes, it was kind of borderline as to whether I wanted to do that. And so I think for this example, I'm just going to leave it as is. But if you decide you do want to remove the stars, there's a number of tools in Siril. One is under image processing and star processing. There's the StarNet star removal. That's one way. It's a free tool. You could also go to scripts, and under Python scripts, under Scicon, there's this starless Python script you could run. So there's a number of options. Also, I've got a paid version of the RC Astro Star Exterminator. So that's a paid version option. So again, that's just if you decide to do star removal. For simplicity's sake and for this video, I've got other videos where I've done star removal. You can take a look at those. So I'm just going to leave this as is. So what do we do next? So for this video, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. And I found something interesting on this. If I go into linear mode, so now the image naturally goes dark again. What I found is I could either go into scripts, Python scripts, and use some of these great scripts that exist, like the hypermetric stretch and others. But I found for this particular image, at least for my eyes, if I went to image processing, stretches, and just chose histogram transformation, it brings up a dialog. And there's a button here that is basically an Autostretch algorithm. So if I click on it, it actually processes the image and stretches it in a way that I kind of liked. And so I just want to contrast what this is doing here. I actually did change the image. When I was down here, this linear auto stretch, that was just a viewing mode. That didn't change the image. This did. So I'm going to click on apply and then close it. And then what I might do is go to image processing stretches and curves. And if you look at this curve here, I may lower the dark area a bit. So I just go down to the far left, hold down my mouse button and kind of drag this in just a tiny, tiny bit. And you see the image very subtly goes darker. And then click on apply and close. So this is just one way in Siril. That's a really simple processing. I'm done. And I'm kind of, if I wanted to, I'm ready to move over to Photoshop or GIMP or Affinity, whichever ones you use. And so let's go ahead and do that as the next stage. All right, so I'm now in Photoshop. And again, you're not locked in to using Photoshop. I just happen to have a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. So that's why I use Photoshop. You can use Affinity, which is a no-cost option, as well as GIMP to do most of these steps. And so I've got my image open in Photoshop, and I'm going to use the mouse wheel. I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit to the background. And then if I hold down my space bar and drag the left mouse button, you'll see in the image, to my eyes, there's kind of a little bit of background noise that looks not quite right to me. So there's a trick in Photoshop that you can do. And similarly, you can do it in the other tools as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do Control J in Windows to copy the layer. So I'm going to go over to Select, Color Range, then Shadows. And I'm going to select the range here. I'm going to back it off a little bit. The black areas represent what's not being selected. So let's take it to around 50. Click on OK. And then I'm going to do Control J. And then I'm going to go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter. So this brings up the Adobe Camera Raw dialog. I'm going to go down to Details. And I'm going to increase noise reduction all the way. I'm going to take the detail down to 0. And the same thing for color noise reduction, detail 0. And then click on OK. You see what it did to the background? It kind of smoothed it out a little bit. And if I zoom out, you'll notice that for example, the elephant trunk part is not actually smoothed out because we didn't select that part. But it looks a bit almost unnaturally smooth to me. So what you can do is you can change the opacity. So we go down to 0. That's with no effect. But if I increase this just very, very subtly, maybe to around there, and zoom in, and you see that noise is kind of de-emphasized a little bit. If I just move this around, again, if I go opacity down to 0, that's with nothing smoothed out, and then just increase it just a little bit. And we don't want to smooth out some of these fine filaments that show up in the nebula pieces. So these areas here. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. And then I'm going to do Control Alt Shift E. That is basically copy visible. And so if I now then go into Filter, Camera Raw again, I can now play around with some of the saturation settings. So let's maybe increase the saturation. I can go crazy here all the way. That looks a bit unnatural to me. So I'm just going to take it to about maybe 20. Vibrance is another setting. Again, if I go all the way to the right, again, it's just way, way chromated. And so let's just make this around 10. Clarity is the other one that I like to use. If again, all the way to the right, it's because way, way too much contrast. So let's just take this down to about 5. Click OK. And you can see there the image is starting to show through quite nicely. As I said, I captured the larger part of the nebula, the whole of IC 1396. The elephant trunk part, the IC 1396A, is kind of this area here. So I definitely encourage you to play around with Nina for mosaic capture. Play around with Siril for processing, as I showed you some really simple steps. And then go into your tool of choice, GIMP, Affinity, Photoshop, whatever you had, to kind of play around with some of the background settings. What I would then do, if I do Control 0 here, kind of zooms out to 100%. Sometimes what I would do is if I go to the crop tool in Photoshop, I can then kind of crop to a 2/3 ratio and sort of select that area and maybe hone in just on the elephant trunk part itself if I wanted to, and then just press enter and it's cropped to that. Anyway, thank you for your time, and please subscribe and pass this on to others if you think it's been useful. And we'll do many, many more of these videos where we focus specifically on certain objects and how you might process them. Thank you.